Your dog stops mid-play, ears flatten. He walks to the corner of the room and just stands there, staring at nothing, tail tucked, refusing to move no matter how many times you call him. You check the window. Nothing. You check the door. Nothing. 20 minutes later, the ground starts to shake. You've probably heard the story before, maybe from a grandparent, maybe from a documentary. Animals know when disaster is coming. Dogs howl before earthquakes. Elephants flee before tsunamis. Birds go silent before storms. And the explanation you've probably absorbed, without ever really questioning it, is some vague notion of a sixth sense, a mystical, unexplainable animal intuition that humans simply lost somewhere along the evolutionary road. But the real answer is far stranger than intuition. It's not mystical at all. It's physics, it's chemistry, it's biology functioning exactly the way it evolved to function, just tuned to frequencies, vibrations, and particles that your body was never built to notice. Animals aren't predicting the future. They're reading the present far more precisely than you can. To understand what's actually happening, you have to go back to one of the strangest, most controversial events in the history of seismology, a city in northeastern China called Haicheng. In February 1975, officials in Haicheng ordered a mass evacuation based partly on reports of erratic animal behavior. Snakes were seen leaving hibernation burrows in the dead of winter, which should have been biologically impossible. They should have been dormant for another month at least. Livestock refused to enter barns. Dogs barked incessantly for no visible reason. Combined with a cluster of small foreshocks that seismologists were tracking, Chinese officials made the call to move people out of their homes. Hours later, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake leveled much of the city. Because of the evacuation, the death toll was a fraction of what it could have been. It remains one of the only cases in history where a major earthquake evacuation is credited, even partially, to animal behavior, alongside conventional seismic monitoring. Skeptics have picked apart the Haicheng case for decades, and fairly so. A lot of the reporting came after the fact, filtered through political narratives during a time when Chinese state media had reason to showcase success stories. But Haicheng wasn't the last time this pattern showed up. It happened again, on a much larger and far better documented scale, 30 years later, in Sri Lanka. On December 26, 2004, one of the deadliest tsunamis in recorded history struck the coastlines of the Indian Ocean, killing over 230,000 people across more than a dozen countries. In Sri Lanka's Yala National Park, a nature reserve sitting directly in the tsunami's path, wildlife officials made a haunting observation in the disaster's aftermath. Elephants that had been grazing near the shore were seen moving to higher ground hours before the wave hit. Flamingos abandoned their usual low-lying breeding areas. Despite the wave killing over 250 people within the park's boundaries, almost no wild animal carcasses were found. Not one dead elephant, not one dead leopard. The animals, it seemed, had already left. So what were they actually detecting? This is where the science stops sounding like folklore and starts sounding like something out of a physics textbook. The first mechanism is what researchers sometimes call the P-wave hypothesis. When an earthquake ruptures underground, it releases two main types of seismic waves. P-waves, or primary waves, travel fastest and arrive first, but they're low amplitude and largely imperceptible to humans. S-waves, or secondary waves, arrive seconds to minutes later, and they're the ones that actually shake buildings and cause the destruction you associate with an earthquake. Humans generally can't feel P-waves at all, but many animals can. Dogs and cats have far more sensitive inner ears and paw pads attuned to ground vibration, and some species, like elephants, can detect low-frequency seismic vibrations through specialized receptors in their feet and trunks, a phenomenon studied extensively by researchers like Caitlin O'Connell, who documented elephants sensing distant vibrations transmitted through the earth itself. In other words, in the Sri Lanka case, the elephants may not have predicted the tsunami. They may have simply felt the actual earthquake that caused it, minutes before the wave arrived, using senses tuned to catch signals your body filters out entirely. But P-waves only explain part of the picture, and they don't explain behavior changes that show up hours, sometimes days, before a seismic event. the kind reported in Haicheng, and the kind that's since been captured with hard data in more recent research. This is where a second, even stranger hypothesis comes in, one pioneered by a NASA-affiliated geophysicist named Friedemann Freund. Freund's research focused on what happens to rocks deep underground in the days before an earthquake, when tectonic plates are under enormous building stress. He found that certain rocks under extreme pressure release positively charged particles, essentially turning stressed stone into a kind of battery. These charged particles can travel upward through rock and into the atmosphere, ionizing the air, altering local electromagnetic fields, and in some documented cases, even producing the eerie glowing phenomenon known as earthquake lights, which witnesses have reported for centuries before major quakes. This has become known, informally, as the ion hypothesis. Freund's work suggests that animals sensitive to electromagnetic and chemical changes in their environment, and there's a wide range of species with this sensitivity, from migratory birds that navigate using magnetic fields to catfish with electroreceptive organs, could be picking up these atmospheric changes well before any physical shaking begins. It would explain why unrelated species, in unrelated locations, sometimes show synchronized unease in the lead-up to a major seismic event, days before humans have any instrumentation flagging a problem. If this all sounds too speculative to take seriously, it's worth knowing that modern researchers have stopped treating it as folklore and started treating it as a testable engineering problem. A German biologist named Martin Wichelski, director of the Max Planck Institute of Animal Behavior, ran a multi-year study tagging farm animals, cows, sheep, and dogs, with motion-sensing accelerometers in a seismically active region of Italy. Published in the journal eLife in 2020, the study found that in the hours before earthquakes, animals within a certain radius of the eventual epicenter showed measurable spikes in restlessness and movement, detectable well before the quake struck, especially when multiple species showed the anomaly simultaneously. Wichelski's broader project, called Icarus, now tracks the movement of thousands of animals worldwide via satellite, with the long-term goal of building an early warning network that uses animal behavior as a live biological sensor grid, something no human-made instrument can fully replicate, because animals are, in a very real sense, standing directly on top of the disaster before it happens. Here's the part that reframes everything, though. None of these animals are trying to warn you. There's no altruism in it, no signal being sent for your benefit. A dog hiding under the bed isn't protecting you. He's panicking, purely and selfishly, because his body is picking up on stimuli that feel, to his nervous system, like an immediate personal threat. The elephants in Sri Lanka weren't saving each other out of some noble instinct. They were running from something they could physically feel, the same way you'd bolt if you suddenly felt the floor drop out from under you. What looks to humans like a warning is really just an animal doing what its body has always done, reacting to threat information faster and more completely than you ever could. You're not witnessing communication, you're witnessing eavesdropping, humans catching a glimpse of a sensory world we were never built to access. It's worth being careful here, though, because it's easy to let this idea run further than the evidence actually supports. Most of the time, when your dog acts strange, there is no earthquake coming. He's not sensing catastrophe. He's reacting to a squirrel, a smell, an unfamiliar sound 3 houses down, or nothing identifiable at all. The scientific studies on animal disaster prediction remain, by most seismologists' own admission, limited in sample size and difficult to test rigorously because you can't exactly schedule an earthquake to run a controlled experiment. Even Wichelski's team is careful to frame their findings as promising correlations, not confirmed predictive tools. This isn't proof that your pet has secret psychic powers, and it's not an argument to trust animal behavior over actual seismological instruments, which remain far more reliable for early warning systems. What the research does suggest is something more modest and, honestly, more fascinating, that certain animals have sensory systems tuned to a slice of physical reality that overlaps, just slightly, with the earliest physical signs of disaster, and that overlap is worth studying seriously instead of dismissing as superstition. To see how far this idea has actually traveled, it helps to look at the timeline all at once. In 1975, Haicheng, China, evacuates ahead of a major earthquake, partly influenced by reports of erratic animal behavior. In 2004, animals in Sri Lanka's Yala National Park moved to higher ground hours before the Indian Ocean tsunami reaches shore, while human casualties number in the hundreds of thousands. Through the 1990s and 2000s, Friedemann Freund's laboratory work at NASA's Ames Research Center builds the physical case for the ion hypothesis, showing that stressed rock genuinely does release detectable charged particles before rupture. In 2020, Martin Wikelski's team publishes hard behavioral data in eLife, proving measurable animal restlessness hours before seismic events in Italy. And today, satellite-tagged animals across the globe, through projects like Icarus, are being quietly built into one of the most ambitious early warning networks ever attempted, one that doesn't rely on machines at all, but on the nervous systems of the animals already living on the fault lines. So the next time your dog goes still for no visible reason, ears pinned, staring at a wall you can't make sense of, you don't need to imagine anything supernatural to explain it. You don't need a sixth sense, or a psychic bond, or some ancient animal wisdom lost to human evolution. You just need to remember that his body is built to notice a world that's still invisible to yours, and that somewhere beneath your feet, in the stone and the air and the electricity all around you, something might already be moving that you simply can't feel yet.